Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of MansfieldToday.com. I trust you had a great weekend. My name is Chris Gibbons, and I'm standing in for Jeremy Mansfield, as I have done for the past couple of weeks. He's not been well, hopefully, I'm told he is recuperating, and will also hopefully be back in the hot seat before too much longer. It is a great pity he's not here today because our special guest is someone that I've had the pleasure of working with on and off for many a long year. I know Jeremy has done too when we both worked for Prime Media Broadcasting. Me at Talk Radio 702, Jeremy at 702, and then, of course, at 94.7. Our guest still does work at 702, where he anchors a long-running and award-winning business show every weekday evening. That can only mean the one and only Bruce Whitfield. Bruce, he's here with us this morning in his capacity as a best-selling author. Bruce Whitfield, welcome. You have just published a new book called...
For the record, sorry, I need
Yes.
to correct you on something. Mansfield, I've known him since 120 kilograms ago. And that's between us, by the way. And, as a 3-year-old, I used to run around naked on the beach, and he would be the big superhero at Fish River in the Eastern Cape. So we've known him for an awfully long time. I'm glad he's recuperating.
I did not know that, Dave. You see, you join us on Mansfield today and you learn something every day. It goes all the way back to you as a 3-year-old. That, I might say, as someone who has a 3-year-old granddaughter at the moment, is quite a frightening thought. But
It is.
let's talk about your book. You've called the book Genius, How to Take Smart Ideas Global. And when I saw it, I thought, oh no, genius, no, not another book about Leonardo da Vinci and Einstein, Thomas Edison and Steve Jobs. But in fact, you define genius as something very different. Tell me about it.
I wish I'd called over the weekend. I had an epiphany and I went, damn it, the book should have been called Grit. Because that's what it's about, really. It's about genius. It's about the ability of South Africans over the last 50 years or so to build globally competitive businesses out of South Africa. Some by sheer necessity, they've designed their businesses for export. Others have taken advantage of export opportunities and have exported their ideas, their IP, their people all around the world. And there have been some wonderful stories of great success and many of absolute failure and abject failure. And it's the story of real grit and determination of a handful of individuals who've not only crafted remarkable, globally competitive businesses in South Africa, but have taken those smart ideas global.
So what you've produced is, in fact, a compendium of South Africa's most successful businesses. And by successful, you mean businesses that have, in fact, gone global. There are some very, very big ones, very obvious ones, the likes of SAB Miller, for example. What made initially South African breweries, which of course became SAB Miller, so successful?
It was sheer necessity. I mean, there's nothing like scarcity to breed to breed an opportunity. And of course, what was SAB's biggest scarcity in the 1980s? It was access to markets. It was trapped within South Africa in the apartheid state, but it calculated accurately a couple of things. One, that the Berlin Wall was going to fall at some point, and when that happened, there was no way that the apartheid state, which was already on its knees at the time, P.W. Botha, you remember those days very, very well indeed, that couldn't continue in perpetuity, and there would have to be a transition, and that would likely open up global markets to it. So SAB's greatest success was not exporting beer. It didn't do a Carlsberg or a Heineken and create a global brand, but it started preparing itself in the 1980s by going and headhunting the very best South African talent it could from around the world, from the drinks industries around the world, and prepared them for this great opening up of the world. And it happened really, really quickly. And when it happened, SAB had the systems, it had the processes, it had the know-how, it had the intelligence, and it had the sheer nachas, if you would like, don't mind me using a Yiddish word, to get things going. And they did it with remarkable speed and alacrity because they knew their global biggest rivals around the world would be doing precisely the same sort of thing. So they spent a decade preparing for what has been the most successful global expansion of any South African company ever since then.
We also, Bruce, seem to do pretty well in terms of mining companies and, of course, big banks.
Absolutely. And mining is interesting because you don't really do an export out of mining. Yes, you export your commodities from the country in which they are mined. And we're massive exporters, of course, of platinum group metals. We have the biggest reserves of platinum group metals in the world. And with Russia being a country non grata at the moment, it plays to South Africa's advantage with platinum group metals because we do have enormous reserves. And we also have an appalling track record of regulation and government government intervention and misappropriation. What's the word I'm looking for? Just a really shocking policy frameworks, and we keep missing out on mining cycles time and time again, which is precisely what pushed people like Tony Treyer, for example, 20 years ago, to go global. And I recall an annual report from Anglo American saying that the biggest risk for South Africa is political risk. And you'll remember it, Chris, I'm sure, because Thabo Mbeki went absolutely apoplectic. How dare you suggest that there is political risk in South Africa? Well, we know how that turned out, don't we? And so here we've got a situation where our mining IP has been sent globally. Those listings in London that happened at the turn of the century certainly played out very well for the mining industry, far better than our technology players, for most of our insurance companies who tried. Remember Sage? They went into the United States. Old Mutual went and burned 100 billion rand plus on its failed global expansion and has gradually trimmed its sails all the way back to the African continent. And banks have been forced to do the same thing. I mean, we had some remarkably tenacious bankers about 15 years or so ago. People like Jacko Marie taking Standard Bank global. He owned a bank in Russia. He owned one in the UK. He owned one in Argentina. And there was another one somewhere as well. But they were massively expansionist, and they were looking at the SAB model and saying, wouldn't it be good if this could work for us too? And unfortunately, global financial crisis happened, not South Africa's fault, not their fault, but that led to new capital requirements, and it led to a whole, again, returning home. And so the focus, once again, very much on the African continent from a banking perspective. But there have been some great insurance success stories, amongst them the company that owns Auto and General, very successful in the United Kingdom. It's got businesses in Australia, it's got businesses in Asia, and it, of course, rose to prominence in the United Kingdom. You couldn't do it today because Mr. Orlov, sorry about the schnauzer, Mr. Orlov, who was a meerkat, who was a CGI-generated meerkat, Vladimir Orlov, became this poster child, this weird Russian accented meerkat, because British people, of course, are obsessed with meerkats. And so there's been a huge amount of branding success. South Africans really being very smart about boxing above their weight wherever they've gone, quite frankly.
I'll come back to that in a moment. What I enjoyed about Genius was learning about companies, some of them very successful, people too, that I either had no idea were so big or that I'd never heard of. Stefan Antoni, the architect, for example. I certainly know his name, but I had no idea of his global reach.
I thought you lived in a Stefan Antoni. That's what I thought you did, Mr. Gibbons. I mean, you've gone down in my estimation enormously. But Stefan Antoni is remarkable by any stretch of the imagination. He starts, like most architects do, doing odd jobs and redesigning garages and making them into fifth bedrooms on houses as children grow up in places like Sea Point and other parts of the world. And gradually starts developing his own design style. And gradually he starts deciding, no, hold on a second, let's do the impossible. And if you've ever seen the Stefan Antoni house, just go onto his website and you'll see them there. Impossible concrete slabs, impossible design elements that have been developed by him and his team. And now, to this day, he employs about 400 people operating out of gardens in Cape Town, diagonally across the road from what used to be Parliament. And he's got 150 design staff, 250 architectural graduates, and they design projects around the world. 96% of his work, and he doesn't get out of bed for less than $15 million, but 96% of his work, 98% of his work is outside of South Africa. So if you go to his website, you can see the most remarkable creations across, particularly anywhere where there's sun, that needs big glass and open spaces. He is very, very popular. And ski resorts, so there are properties in Colorado, lots in California, plenty in Miami, a massive yacht club in China. There is an entire little island of Bodrum, for example, which has been designed a bit like Fourway's townhouse complex, but very expensive, of townhouses effectively on this wonderful little island off Bodrum. So he's been incredibly busy, incredibly active, and has designed literally thousands of properties out of Cape Town, where he employs 400 people, highly skilled people, and they do their jobs. And if you are working on a Colorado project, well, you work on Colorado time. So if 8 o'clock Colorado time is 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Cape Town, that's when you arrive at work, and you'll work until 11 or 12 until your client has gone home. And he's just managed to circumvent time zones, borders, and really grasp the imagination of the rich world.
And of course, like so many of the success stories mentioned in Genius, he charges in dollars or pounds or euros, but
Yeah,
his costs are in the humble rand. Now, we're not Silicon
absolutely.
Valley, but we also don't do badly in terms of startups. Aerobotics, Sweep South, Flex Club, Skynamo, Cloudbox, to name just a handful of the ones you mentioned in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we've all got our favorites, of course, but I just love the Skynamo story. These are incredibly bright young. There were young mathematicians at the transition of South Africa from apartheid to its 1994 democracy. A couple of maths nerds at Stellenbosch University were working on technologies that would have naturally taken them into Arms Corps or places like that. Instead, they were kicked out of those opportunities as the transition happened and the amalgamation of armed forces happened. And so they were forced to start their own thing. And so, with mathematical algorithms, they've created formula which allow the Meerkat Space Telescope, for example, to look further into the Milky Way than has ever been deemed possible, courtesy of the algorithms they create. They've worked for countless other telecommunications companies all around the world, helping their systems work better. And if you've ever been to a posh driving range as a golfer, those machines that tell you the flight of your ball and the direction it was going, even if you've shanked it off to the right-hand side, it will give you the flight path of your golf ball. That stuff comes from the nerds at Skynamo. And there are just so many other wonderful examples of aerobotics using artificial intelligence and drone technologies to help farmers around the world, again, to monitor their crops and to monitor their fields and to keep a good eye as to whether or not there are any pest problems, or whether they've got any disease problems in their orchards or anywhere in their crops. And they're becoming increasingly popular in the Midwest of the United States with those huge rolling plains, of course, so much easier for a farmer to sit having his morning cup of coffee and keeping an eye on the farm via drone than actually having to go and walk the fields themselves. So some really smart and clever innovations coming out of South Africa.
Another big one, another obvious one, Bruce, Nando's. But what was their recipe for success? I mean, more to it surely than just peri peri.
Absolutely, but Peri Peri is at the start of everything, isn't it? I mean, Fernando Duarte and Robbie Brosen were work colleagues. They both worked for Robbie's dad, who was the importer, was it Toshiba or something from Taiwan in the 1980s? And they decided they would go into business for themselves. And what started out as a little side hustle and a bit of an investment for Robbie Brosen, he discovered he was pretty good at front of house, terrible at grilling chicken, but very good at front of house. And so they got the first one, as we know, called Chicken Land. It was the outlet that they bought with the peri peri chicken and operated it. And by the time they got to about 3 stores, somebody in their brining department, which is where their head office is today in Berea in Johannesburg, came to them and said, you know what, this is such a good idea. This really should go international. And Robbie and Fernando had discussed this, that this was an opportunity for them. They should be looking, but they needed capital. And this guy in their massive kitchen in Berea said to them, well, I know a guy who runs an insurance business and he's based in London, but you should really meet him. And of course, it's none other than Dick Enthoven, who's the scion of the Hollard insurance empire. And Dick Enthoven came to Joburg and he went to, I think, store number 2 or 3, tasted the chicken, and he said, we've definitely got to take this chicken global. And he said to Robbie Brosen, he said to him, what you have scarcity right now, and this goes to the point of scarcity that I talk about in the book. You have scarcity right now. Your scarcity is capital. I have plenty of money. You have plenty of energy and ambition. I want you to make lots and lots of money, because if you make lots of money, we'll make lots of money. So he created a formula in which he gave Fernando and Robbie some money in a proportion that astounds people. And you'll have to listen to the podcast when it's published in the next couple of months to find out what their proportion was, because it blows people's minds as to the real intuitive insight of Dick Enthoven when it came to funding 2 hungry young men.
I look forward to that. As I put the book down, Bruce, I thought about a comment that's made quite often by someone you and I both know very well, Gibbs at the business school in Johannesburg, Gibbs founder, strategy professor Nick Benadell, who says that in terms of the companies and the businesses that it has produced, South Africa really does punch above its weight. Your book is certainly evidence of that, but could you sum up, a final question for you, could you sum up why? Is there one thread that links them all?
We're 0.25% of global GDP. We really are an insignificant pimple on the planet. We shouldn't be as successful as we are. There are a couple of things. Scarcity, I think, is something. Scarcity of hope, scarcity of opportunity, a need to expand, a need to grow, a desire to grow, and some really wise entrepreneurial individuals who, if South Africa was a Germany or a Switzerland with huge populations of wealthy individuals, wouldn't have to expand their operations internationally. But because of that scarcity of market and of opportunity in South Africa, they've had to go global. But also, there's a huge amount of optimism that exists within the minds of these people, even though they know they operate in one of the toughest and least supportive business environments on earth. They're optimistic about their own capability and their ability to grow and to develop these ideas and to take these smart ideas, which they've created in South Africa. And South Africa is a great sort of petri dish, I suppose, of opportunity, because you can make mistakes in South Africa and nobody's ever really going to remember or know because there's so much other stuff going on. But if you succeed and if you can create that magic formula, as so many, as I've discussed in the book, have, then the world truly is your oyster, and the opportunity then is to grow. But it's by no means guaranteed. Far more people fail than succeed, but nobody wants to read about failure. That's why I've written about success.
And a very good read it is to Bruce Whitfield, author of Genius, How to Take Smart Ideas Global. Thank you for having been with me today on mansfieldtoday.com. That's it for today's edition. We'll be back next week. Hopefully Jeremy will be with us, recuperating. He is at the moment, and we'll keep you posted on that one. In the meantime, thank you for having been with us. I will see you next time.